Starting on my left, Dr. Burton Webb, he was born in Michigan. Parents were educators, and that's where he wanted to go in life. He attended, I'll skip your education. But you taught at Indiana Wesleyan, both university and the medical students. And he accepted the position as Vice President for Academic Affairs and faculty at Northwest Nazarene University in Idaho. And then they took him back to the Midwest, and he's president of the University of Pikeville. He's their 21st president, and 2 years ago he took up that job. And I know you'll find what he's going to talk about fascinating and what's happening in the new education. Chris Boone, who I've had the pleasure of knowing now for these 14 years since the Arizona State took on the mandate of sustainability, and he has an amazing background, and he was co-PI for the Urban Long-Term Ecological Research Projects in Baltimore and Phoenix, supported by the National Science Foundation. He's taught classes on sustainable urbanization, urban and environmental health, principles and methods of sustainability, environmental justice, sustainable design and innovation, and interdisciplinary methods of socio-ecological research. He's on the executive committee of the Council of Environmental Deans and Directors and the Board of Directors for the National Council on Science and the Environment. And you'll be hearing from him in just a moment. He's our first speaker. And then a person local and near and dear to our heart, although I personally have not met him before, but I've known of the amazing work at the Sage School in Hailey, Idaho. It's an independent grade 6 through 12 school dedicated to honoring young adolescents and the role they play in constructing thriving communities. He's had over 25 years of teaching experience and spent his professional life in education, the nonprofit sector, and working to connect students and people to the world around him. Just a couple of additional comments, because they'll do much better at introducing themselves than I am. I saw just the other day, a couple days ago, a note on the internet came across, and it's from a man who came out. He was the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. They were on a government committee, to look at what is the most important for America's economic competitiveness. They came out with a report called the Gathering Storm Report. It concluded that 2 top priorities for America to remain competitive in the global marketplace was to strengthen education and to double our investment in basic research. The recommendations were quickly and faithfully followed by China and our other competitors. Anyway, let me introduce the important people. Chris will start, and then we're going to try and leave a little bit of time for questions, which I'll take from the audience.
I will say a few words about this gentleman in the slide. That's our president, Michael Crow, who's been with us since 2002. And above him sits the charter of the university that now is quite conveniently right outside of Wrigley Hall at Arizona State University. And the key words of that charter for many of us is that the purpose and ideals of the university is that we measure our excellence not by whom we exclude, but by whom we include and how they succeed. And that's a very different model from most university, at least ranking systems, where the more people you turn away, the higher you get ranked by those ranking systems. And we feel it's a public responsibility to make sure that all those students that have an ability have an opportunity to be educated. And one of the things that President Crow has been able to do over his last 16 years as president is he's moved the university to a state where the student body now represents the diversity of the state of Arizona for the very first time in its history. And he's done that while state support for the institution has dropped from about 50% of operating costs in 1990 to around 12 or 13%. So we're getting less money from the state, but we're educating a much broader swath of the population. That's one of the main reasons why our peers have identified ASU as #1 in innovation in the United States for 3 years in a row. And we like to add Stanford and MIT, and I think you were a Stanford grad, so that's a bit of a dig on Stanford. But obviously, we know that we're in good company. So Julie has been absolutely instrumental in helping us push forward the vision of sustainability at the university, not just within the School of Sustainability. So one of the reasons for the early success, and I'll tell you when we look back at the history of the school and our efforts there, no one likes change. Change can be very difficult. And there's a lot of skepticism when we started the Institute. You remember that, Julie, in the school. People said, you'll be...
Inside and out.
Right, so people said, you'll be gone in 3 years. Sustainability is amorphous. It can't be defined. And this is from fellow faculty on the campus. Well, of course, we persevered. And not only did we persevere, but we also succeeded. And a lot of that had to do with not just having a wonderful leader in place, President Crow, who believed in sustainability as a transformative idea, both for education and research, but because we also had really key external partners. Julie was one of them. She is a co-chair of our board along with our university president as well as Rob Walton. We have an amazing board of directors. Amy is on that as well. So we're able to use that board as a sounding board, if I may use that term, to make sure that what we were teaching our students and the kind of research that we're doing was not something that would be useful 30 or 40 years from now, but could be immediately put to use. So that notion and idea of using use-inspired research and educating our students whenever possible using real-world opportunities, we found to be an absolute bedrock for our principles, but also, in the end, for our success. So we've come a long way since President Crow came in 2002, and the point of this slide is to demonstrate that we're not slowing down, that we recognize that we have to constantly innovate. This is a new field. The second point of it is that one of the main reasons why we've succeeded at ASU and helped to inspire other programs around the country is that we never try to own sustainability within the school nor in the institute. It's kind of like the environment wars of the 1970s at universities, where the biologists tried to claim that they did the environment and no one else could come and play. We recognized early on that if we tried to wall off the school and the institute and say sustainability belonged to us, we would quickly wither and die. So we work with engineering, we work with business, we work with law to make sure that not only do they and their students have an opportunity to have a sustainability education, but their insights and their research, their partnerships are all part of how we can be a successful institution. So we have a wide variety of degree programs, a Bachelor of Arts, a Bachelor of Science. We offer a series of graduate degrees. If any of you are interested in another degree, let me know. We've got one for you. We've built our curriculum around a series of competencies rather than core knowledge. Sustainability, when you look at it in total, there's no way that any individual could ever hope to possess all of the knowledge and methods necessary to really participate in sustainability in a comprehensive way. So we built our curriculum around this framing, and it's been amazingly, it's had amazing life, shelf life, and it's also inspired many other programs around the world to think about how we educate our students slightly differently. So systems thinking, these are going to be familiar to all of you in the audience. We think that this is foundational to sustainability. The reductionist model of education certainly is important, and it's played its role, but we also recognize that if we think in reductionist terms or in linear terms, then we're going to be missing the larger picture. We might be doing things with the best of intentions, but if we don't think in systems terms, we might be making things worse. We want our students to be able to think about plausible and desirable futures. We want our students to recognize that values are really fundamental to what motivates people. So we need to understand our own worldviews and how they might be different from others, and then try to find some common ground to get to a common future where we can all not just survive and thrive. We need to think about a variety of different strategies to get there, whether it's policy or economic, if it's cultural. And then finally, a collaborative competency, recognizing that those skills of actually working together is really fundamental for the future success of not only of our students, but for sustainability. We've seen rapid growth across the university, both within our school, but we also early on made sure, again, that we had an opportunity for anyone at ASU to participate in sustainability. This is an undercount because there's thousands more students who have taken sustainability courses at the university. We're kind of like China. We're a big university, so anything that we do in absolute terms tends to be large. But one of the reasons why we celebrate that is because we recognize that there's some things where we need those absolute numbers. We don't just need a percentage of our students to be working on this. We need to be unleashing onto the world thousands of students who have this very different way of learning and thinking and doing. We've worked very closely with local high schools, but also high schools in other parts of the country. We do not want sustainability to be a so-called discovery major, and increasingly that's no longer an issue. So we've worked very closely with high schools to make sure that sustainability can be incorporated, not added on as another subject, but as a frame of thinking for high school subjects and also middle school students as well. We've created through our work with the Walton Family Foundation, we've created a Sustainability Teachers Academy. We've educated teachers in every state in the country. We're now working internationally as well. Our campus is a living laboratory. We're in a sunny place. We were at 25 megawatts of solar production. We've just jumped up to 50. There are no roofs left on the main Tempe campus. They're all covered with solar. In fact, then we had to start. Yes, thank you. So we actually had to start building shades made out of solar, so they now serve double duty. If any of you spent any time in the valley in summer or even late spring and early fall, these are appreciated on that front as well. We make sustainability an opportunity not just for faculty, but also for staff. So as far as I know, we're the only university that as part of the performance criteria for all staff, they have to discuss how they've contributed to the sustainability mission of the university. So it's built in from the groundskeepers up to the president. We've aligned our faculty with the Sustainable Development Goals, and I know, Amy, you talked about this earlier. This is for a couple of reasons, but for me, one of the really critical reasons, and this is not just in the School of Sustainability, but across the university, is that we want those faculty who think that they're doing just basic research to understand that even their research can be aligned with specific missions, goals, and targets. And we think that that's a really important motivating factor. We are working internationally. We recognize that sustainability, even if we're working in our backyard, there's no planet B. We need to find ways to scale those really good solutions to the global level if we're really going to have a future for everyone, whether that's local or our international partners. So we've created this global consortium for sustainability outcomes. Happy to talk more about that later. Brian Sweetie, who's on our board, just recently gave a gift to the university to create a Sweetie Center for Sustainable Food Systems. In part, this is tapping into, I'm sure you've all seen this, this generation is so much more food conscious than my generation. I was always trying to get the most calories for the least amount of money. They are much more aware of where their food comes from, how it affects not just their nutrition, but ecology, how it affects livelihoods elsewhere around the world, how it affects carbon emissions and so forth. So really tapping into that student passion. We've created a global mentorship opportunity for our students, and this is to get them outside of their comfort zone to try to understand sustainability concerns from different political, cultural, and economic contexts from which they're familiar. We've been working with our graduate students to help them work with small organizations around the world to take their expertise, usually to small nonprofits. We have launched a couple of recent initiatives around research, which again starts to look at these issues of sustainability at a global level. Again, what we think is really fundamental for the future of sustainability. So my last two slides. The reason why I think we've succeeded, in addition to Julie's leadership and our president, is because we've been able to convince everyone at the university that they all play a role. So sustainability is an all-in mission. It's not just the responsibility of campus facilities or of the cafeterias or of the biology department. We're all in. And by all in, I also mean that we're also inclusive. So for sustainability to succeed, we need to make sure that it's not just something for the privileged. It's not just a luxury item. It's something that everyone recognizes that they can play a role in helping us get to the future that we want. And then finally, if we are going to be able to meet those goals, it's going to require vigilant, hence in italics, vigilant collaboration and partnerships. It's so easy to fall back to what you know and to what's familiar and the people that you are already familiar with and know how to work with. But we need to continue to constantly reach out, whether the Sun Valley Resilience Institute or if it's a small NGO working in India. This is something that we have to maintain as an absolute key and trust for all of us. And with that, I'll pass it on to the next speaker.
Awesome. In 1968, you will remember, I think, those of you who are old enough, I see a lot of people out there my age and older, there was a lot of turmoil in the country in that year in particular. And in 1968, we had the racial tension in the South. We also had all of the riots that were taking place at Berkeley and at other colleges around the country. And in 1968, my little college, Pikeville College at the time, hired a brand new president. He was 35 years old. His name was Tom Johns. You probably don't remember anything about Tom because he didn't last very long. He came in with a very progressive agenda. He wanted to transform the economy of the mountains, and he wanted to take those folks in the mountains and help them with healthcare and help them with economics, help them to walk away from coal as their main economic source, and move toward a more socially conscious, service-oriented academic program. He was the only college president, probably in the history of Eastern Kentucky, who was fired because he was too liberal. He actually made the cover of Time magazine as being one of those individuals who was protested out of office by his more conservative students while all of the liberal clashes were going on everywhere else around the country. Behind the scenes, what really happened was that Tom moved too quickly. He ran afoul of the very powerful interest groups who were present in our community, who were very strongly pro-fossil fuels and pro-coal. We were in a period of time where coal was beginning another boom. More than half of the board owned coal mines, and they were worried that Tom's progressive approach was counter to what they were doing. They actually got him called up before the state Department on Un-American Activities as a potential communist, which led to all kinds of problems. I tell you that story not because it's an interesting story, but it kind of sets the stage for the region in which I work. There have been a lot of changes since Dr. Johns walked away and moved on with other things in his life. The economy's transitioned for us. We talk about in our area the war on coal. And you might not hear that a whole lot in Sun Valley, Idaho, but you hear it an awful lot in Eastern Kentucky. And it's usually preceded with Obama's war on coal, which I point out to the people who will listen that it actually started in the Bush administration, not in the Obama administration, although it was carried further during that period of time. I'm not telling you that was the wrong move or that it was a bad move. What I am saying is that the move to fossil fuels, which I agree with, I think that's the proper move, has devastated the economy of a region that used to stand on its own 2 feet. We had about 60,000 coal jobs in the region and are now down to about 2,500. Most of the people who live in the region are hardworking, honest folks. They just want to make a living and do the right thing by their families. But now they're living in a region that's been completely devastated economically. The number one driver of the economy in my area right now is disability services. We just had a big manhunt, a nationwide manhunt, for an attorney who helped thousands of people get disability services. They're going back through those files and finding that a lot of them were completely inappropriate in their assignment of disability. Now that's unfortunate, but that's part of the area in which we live and serve. The economy's changed, it's shifted. Fossil fuels are declining. The use of them in our region is declining. They're tearing down coal-fired power plants all over Kentucky. Much to the chagrin of people in my area who think, why wouldn't we just burn the local coal? Well, the truth of the matter is that the local coal is mostly gone. It's been mined for almost 100 years. All of the easy seams have been removed. What's left are narrow seams, 18 to 36 inches high, that require coal miners to go in with machinery on their bellies and mine the coal out of these side shafts. The days of strip mining that have taken away hundreds of mountains in our area are pretty much gone. There are very few strip mines left operating in eastern Kentucky. Mostly now it's this very dangerous sort of mining that is sidewall mining that they do. And very few of those jobs remain as well. So we've moved away from that. And now we're at a point in time where eastern Kentucky, and I think Kentucky in general, are beginning to look at a diversified economy. Enter into that a guy who grew up in Michigan. I grew up in Michigan in the 1970s and 80s, during the boom time for another great industry, the automotive industry. When I was living just outside of Flint, Michigan, there were 120,000 people working in the auto industry. Today, there isn't a single General Motors plant left in Flint. It is the most dangerous city in the United States. Crime is through the roof. The number of murders are higher than any other city of any comparable size. And I don't want that to happen in eastern Kentucky. I love eastern Kentucky. It's a great place to live. It's a great place to raise a family. And I don't want that to take place there. So how do we begin to impact that? The answer is, I think, in economic development. And economic development for our region needs to shift away from extractive industries, away from industries where we take something out of the ground and hand 75 to 80% of the wealth to companies who aren't even in our area, which is what extractive industries typically do, and pay people who live there. They think they're getting a good deal because they've got jobs, but most of the wealth is actually going away. We need to move that to a type of industry, to types of industries that are far more productive and far more sustainable. I love the conversation about circular economies. I think that's a wonderful conversation. So we enter into this as a university, and I'm a guy who's been reading Mother Earth news since I was 5 years old. My mom and dad were hippies, and that's just the way it was. So we enter into this place where I have to be very circumspect about what I talk about. I never say anything negative about coal. I never say anything negative about fossil fuels. What I do talk about is diversification of the economy and how we can grow an economy in an area like this, because we've got a tremendous workforce who really just want jobs, and they don't want to leave. There's one thing that's unique about eastern Kentucky. I saw a study that was fascinating. It showed how far away people live from their mothers as a measure of community. In most of the country, people live between 5 and 25 miles away from their mom. And that sounds like a wonderful thing, right? In eastern Kentucky, it's 0.25 miles. That's because there's so little flat ground in eastern Kentucky. Mom and dad have a house, and they own a flat piece of ground, and they put a house next to it for the oldest kid, and then a house next to that for the next oldest kid, and it just goes up the holler. And kids live like that because they want to be close. Family is a really important thing. Narrative is a really important thing. And there is nothing more important than the narrative of dignity. Human dignity, about finding work and finding work that is sustainable and is productive, is something that can be told all around the country, particularly in rural America. So, when I took over the position about 2 years ago as the president of the University of Pikeville, I started to think about what kinds of companies would we like to bring into this area so that we can develop a diversified economy and something that leads to human dignity. I had no idea what was going to take place. And then Jonathan Webb, who's sitting in the back, Jonathan, wave at everybody. There he is, back there in the corner. Jonathan, who's no relation of mine, he calls me Uncle Bert, but that's still no relation. Jonathan and I showed up at the same coffee shop. And we sat down and we started talking about sustainability and food production. Jonathan told me that something like 70 to 80% of the population of the United States is within an 8-hour drive of Pikeville, Kentucky. I had no idea that that was true. He told me something about 50 million tons. I'm getting the numbers wrong, but you'll fix it later, Jonathan. 50 million tons of tomatoes come from Mexico, and he just wanted to take a little bite out of that market. He said, we can build greenhouses here in eastern Kentucky. I said, what do you need for a workforce? He said, well, we need growers, we need assistant growers, we need accountants, we need managers, we need people who are going to take care of the products and do all kinds of agricultural, high-tech ag work. I said, gosh, I don't really know anything about that, but doggone it, I'm excited about this because it's sustainable. So I got on a plane and I flew to the Netherlands. Took my provost with me. I don't know if you know it, but the Netherlands are number 2 in the world for food production. They're a country the size of New Jersey, and they only produce less food than the United States of America.
Wow.
That's stunning. The reason for that is because they grow so much of their food in greenhouses. In a typical farm, you can produce about 2.5 kilograms per square foot of tomatoes. In a typical greenhouse in the Netherlands, it's 85 kilograms. So we flew to Wageningen University, we flew to Haas in the Netherlands. We went to a conference a few months later, and we began to develop partnerships with those universities. And now I have a pretty good idea what it takes to create a sustainable agriculture program. Jonathan and I just signed an agreement so that my university will provide the workers for him and his expanding industry throughout eastern Kentucky. It's not all going to be in Pikeville. It's going to be in places like Moorhead and places like Prestonsburg and Whitesville and all over the place, but I don't really care because it's bringing economic development to Kentucky. Jonathan came to this conference last year, and he talked to somebody from Enterblue. And Enterblue came to eastern Kentucky and said, why the heck didn't anybody tell us there was a college in this town? And they came up and visited with us, and we talked to them about developing programming around their needs. So here's the point. I think the only way to change the hearts and minds of folks who live in rural America is to provide what they need. And what they need are jobs. That's what they need. The reason people are moving to the cities is that there's no work in rural America. That's why they're going to the cities. I sat through an economic development conference in Louisville the other day. Just made me sick to my stomach because Louisville and southern Indiana are fighting it out to get all these big companies. And I said, gosh, stop being so dang greedy and give some of these companies to rural America. You guys are complaining because you don't have a workforce, and I've got 60,000 unemployed coal miners. Here's how we change the narrative. Here's how we change the view of sustainability. It's by giving these folks, helping them to find work in places that are sustainable and dignified, and then they'll stop watching the narrow spectrum of stories that don't confirm all of their biases. Because once they realize that the people around this country care about them and will invest in them, then they'll start to believe in climate change as something real that's taking place. Then they'll start to believe that actually they can make a difference in the world around them. And then we'll have a sustainable and a circular economy.
Whoa.
I hate going last. I knew this was going to happen. I've had too many macaroons, too, so this is going to be trouble. I wrote out my remarks because Amy freaked me out about time. In response to one of my emails, she replied, and I said, what should I talk about? And she said, I trust you. She gently let me know that we didn't have much time, apologized for not having a longer window, and then closed with this. I think speaking to how the Sage School is teaching kids to make a difference and how to thrive in our changing world would be outstanding. And to hear about your theories of learning and your approaches to education, and to hear some specific stories, and reflecting on what you do and what you value, and how to grow your own food. So I would be very interested to see the notes for the hour-long talk, but I think I can get this in about 8 minutes, 40 seconds. I will start with a story. In the beginning of July, I was in Lisbon, Portugal, at the International Conference for the Society for Human Ecology. The conference title was Navigating Complexity, Human Environmental Solutions for a Challenging Future. One of the women who spoke is a law professor who is looking at the ongoing and unfolding tragedy of coral reefs. Interestingly, she is studying the scientists studying the coral and looking at how people respond to crisis, and she found something really fascinating. As scientists vacillate between despair and hope, they tend to divide into two general camps. The despair camp adopts a preserve and protect mindset. They want to freeze the situation as much as they can, set aside marine preserves, stop any increase in sea level warming and rise, and protect the reefs we have. The hope camp adopts an adapt and assist mindset. They look to transition to the best possible future, crossbreeding corals that are surviving and seeding new territory with so-called supercorals. Another person who spoke in Lisbon was 87-year-old Professor Ulrich Lunig from the University of Edinburgh. He started with a wonderful thought experiment. What if you could go back to the start of the Industrial Revolution with all of your current knowledge? What would you do differently? I've been thinking about this a lot for I've been lost in the refinement of this question. What could you do, literally? You'd have this message or messages that you would want to tell people, and what would you do? You would have to travel by foot or horse or ship. You'd have to write a book that would take years to publish and be read by only a few people, and you would be left kind of frantically frustrated. You can see the despair side creeping in. So then I wondered, how could I possibly distill what we know into any kind of message? What simple algorithm or heuristic could I share with people? Could I say over and over for as long as I had in the emerging industrial world? Biology education since the 60s has been bad news. Pesticides, acid rain, deforestation, extinction, climate change. I started teaching in 1992, the year the Union of Concerned Scientists published World Scientists' Warning to Humanity. This is not a cheery paper. Its 2.5 pages are short and direct. The introduction is pretty clear. Human beings and the natural world are on a collision course. Human activities may so alter the living world that it will be unable to sustain life in a manner that we know. The paper succinctly lays out all of the bad news: oceans, soils, forests, the atmosphere. The arc of my teaching career has been very much a vacillation between hope and despair. For the first 17 years, I oscillated between these poles, at once maintaining my childlike love and wonder of the natural world, and simultaneously growing increasingly anxious about its destruction. Many things also happened during this time. Neuroscience and our understanding of the brain expanded exponentially. The intensity and purpose of adolescence as a distinct and critical developmental window grew to almost public knowledge. And of course, I was daily doing field research and teaching. What stuck with students? What was interesting? How did kids best learn? What should they learn? What is learning? And through all of this, there was an emerging disconnection between what I was reading and learning and knowing and what the entire system was doing. I love biology. But teaching students the chemical reactions of photosynthesis or learning about cellular respiration was not preparing them either for the realities of the world as it existed then or the possibilities for how the world will exist in the future. I was critical of every subject. I was critical of the system of education. And so, I tell you this background because if I started and said, I founded a school, you might think that happened quickly. It took me 17 years to build the courage and the vision and the understanding, and that was not built alone. I spent 7 of those years in conversation and observation and teaching with the other founder of the school, Chris McAvoy, and most importantly were the conversations and support and clarity of my wife, Hailey. The tipping point conversation with her went something like this. Okay, I either realize what I'm doing is pretty good, and I just focus on my classroom and what I can do. I just commit to not complaining. Hailey looked at me, then stated the obvious. You know you're never going to stop complaining, right? And so with her support and encouragement and guidance and with an enormous amount of ongoing patience, which was highlighted today in the fact that I was so close to wearing that same shirt that's in the picture, and she was like, man, just don't wear that shirt. So I gave my resignation and I formally stepped into the void, flapping like a baby bird just kicked out of the nest, doing my very best not to hit the ground. This year is the Sage School's 10th year. The school focuses on early adolescence. We focus on early adolescence from 11 to 18 years old, grades 6 through 12, and our primary mission directives are to build a system that promotes self-awareness, community responsibility, and developing a sense of place. Our vision is to help create sustainable and thriving human and ecological communities. The school was founded to add a new narrative to the education landscape, to honor the role that education plays in our lives, and because I truly believe that how we educate our children determines the fate of our world. And that's the elevator pitch, if you didn't notice. Quite honestly and directly, I started this school so I could live a more coherent life. Ulrich's question is academic and theoretical. However, it begets another, more pressing and ultimately personal one. What would I do with all of this information today? What if we knew that there were all sorts of bad things happening? Then what? What would I do with this information going into the future? I thought very hard about this and came up with 3 possibilities. Stay where I was, write and illustrate children's books, or start a school. The Lorax was published in 1971, and Peter Senge said, "Those who identify a problem have an obligation to its solution." I knew the right place was in education, but to paraphrase David Orr, it was a different kind of education that would save us. My heuristic, my algorithm is education, 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 and education of a certain kind. The Sage School is my action. It is what I am doing to make a difference. It is how I am responding to the information I am getting from the world. Most simply, and perhaps most importantly, the school is my hope. What I have learned in the first 9 years is that sometimes innovation is simply committing to what you already know. Innovation is almost always action. I have learned that this school works, that an integrated, authentic education built around human ecology shapes the way our students think about the world, and as critically prepares them for it. Our students are engaged and active in building their identities around participation in the world. They see themselves as architects and builders and creators. I have learned that it is incredibly difficult to bring anything into existence. I now know that the exertion and challenge of getting to the top of the mountain only to realize it is the foothill in front of the peaks beyond is the very exercise that prepares you for the next summit. Those next summits for the Sage School are fully inhabiting our mission and vision, telling and living our story by strengthening the community in which we live, working to make this education as broadly accessible as possible, finding people and partners who share this vision, and of course, the ongoing wonder and privilege of working with teenagers in a topsy-turvy world, and doing all of this with hope.
You know, it was interesting recently. Many of you hopefully got to hear some of the speakers at the Sun Valley Writers Conference. And Thomas Friedman, who writes an op-ed at the New York Times, as many of you know, gave the first night keynote speech. And one of the people in the audience said, "What gives you hope?" And we've listened to 3 different examples of why I have hope. And I think it's up to us here in all of our life's work to keep providing them the opportunities to work with these younger generations who provide us with hope. They're showing what can be done. I walk away from Harry and tell you there is hope. And but it's a hard push every day. And I'm up for the fight. I hope you are.